Good morning, everyone. My name is SAHASHI, and welcome to JIIA's webinar series. The title, 2022 US Midterm Election from Conservative Perspective. So, midterm election is approaching. It will take place within 8 days here. So, many people speculate what will be the outcome from this midterm election. Of course, needless to say, midterm election is always very difficult for the ruling body. And this time, this is also the case. Republican, according to many reports, is now in a very good mood, not only in the House, but also in the Senate. So today, we have two excellent speakers to know more about US midterm election and that implication to US domestic policy and also foreign policy. We have a lot of elections actually taking place in 8 days, not only Senate and also House, but also we have many governors' race, which also attracts a lot of attention to us. But anyway, so I'm very excited to hear from two excellent speakers. So let me introduce the first speaker. First speaker is Dr. Kenneth Weinstein. Dr. Weinstein is now Walter Stern Distinguished Fellow and former president and CEO at Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. Dr. Weinstein is served as president and CEO for Hudson Institute from 2011 to 2020. And many of you remember very well, in March 2020, he was nominated by President Trump to serve as US ambassador to Japan. His writings has been widely published in the United States, Europe, and in Asia. And Dr. Weinstein serves on the advisory committee on trade policy and negotiation for the US trade representative, Catherine Tai. Our second speaker is Mr. Kenichiro SASAE. He is now a president of JIIA, Japan Institute of International Affairs, one of the most prestigious institute for international affairs, as you know. SASAE has a really excellent career as a diplomat, entering the MOFA in 1974. His distinguished career include Director General of Economic Affairs, Director General of Asia and Oceania Affairs Bureau, and also Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs. And also, he was Ambassador of Japan to the United States from 2012 to 2018. This means Dr. Weinstein and Mr. SASAE was really good friends in their Washington time. I'm very glad we have both of you here today. So today's schedule is, first of all, Dr. Weinstein will share his perspective for about 10 minutes. And then Ambassador SASAE will have his own comments on Dr. Weinstein's presentation, like for 10 minutes. And we have some discussion among the panel. Then I want to open the floor to you. This is very short, 1-hour session, but please enjoy. So Dr. Weinstein, without any further ado, floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you, SAHASHI Sensei, for the very kind introduction. I'm honored, delighted to be back with JIIA and my old friend, Ambassador SASAE, who really knows as much about the United States as I do, and I look forward to learning from him in his remarks. Let me begin by saying, as you noted, Professor SAHASHI, that midterms are almost always harsh on incumbents. President Clinton lost 52 House seats in 1994 for the Democrats, or the Democrats lost 52 seats when the Democrats lost 63 seats under President Obama in 2010, and President Trump lost 40 seats for the Republicans. They all suffered massive losses for their parties. George W. Bush was the only one able to hold things together. He actually gained 8 seats because that was the post 9/11 period. That being the first point. The second point is President Biden faces an enormously challenging midterm. He really lost the confidence of the American public after the debacle of the Afghanistan withdrawal, and his favorability ratings, which reflect really a lack of confidence in his ability to do the job, and which are related to his communication skills, the organizational skills, which became apparent during the Afghan crisis, and a sense that he's somehow detached from what really is on the minds of average Americans, are actually at a historic low for a president, even lower than President Trump's, whose abrasive style didn't endear himself to many voters. And this sense has been compounded by rates of inflation unseen in 4 decades, linked in part to a massive increase, in large part to a massive increase in government spending, as forewarned by former Democratic Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, former president of Harvard, among others. And you see it everywhere. I mean, I just went out on Sunday with my wife and 2 of my kids who were in town to get some ice cream. I paid $7 for an ice cream cone at Carvel. That last time I was there, I think it was $4. And you see the cost of milk prices, gas prices fluctuate because it depends on what's on the market, but the price increases are astounding to anybody who goes to the supermarket today. It's incredible for Americans. And I think you've got the crisis at the southern border, which is clear, and the administration hasn't had a clear response to that. The crime waves in major cities, which are increasingly linked in the public's mind, and I think rightly so, to fund the police efforts and efforts to kind of curtail the police power, as well as there's been a broad disappointment with President Biden's pivot to the left since the 2020 election, in which he was elected as a competent centrist blue-collar Democrat who was neither Donald Trump nor Bernie Sanders. In a third point, the Democrats tried to really wage this campaign largely at first on a January 6th agenda, saying that the Republicans posed a real threat to democracy. There's no doubt that the January 6th riots were abhorrent, were a real threat to our democracy. These efforts had some resonance prior to evidence of massive inflation and economic slowdown, but this January 6th rhetoric is not nearly as effective as it could have been. Fourth point, though the Republicans should have had a significant advantage, particularly in the Senate, the Republicans' chances in the Senate at first were eroded by what Majority Leader Mitch McConnell called poor candidate quality, meaning the Republican candidates who were essentially nominated because Donald Trump endorsed them. And there were 6 of these candidates, and they seem to have imperiled Senate seats the Republicans should have won in New Hampshire, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and elsewhere, as well as some House seats that should have gone for Republicans as well. But this fifth point, this poor candidate problem was compounded by the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade. And there's not been a single event, I think, since Biden's election, including January 6th, incidentally, that energized both the Democratic base and Democratic donors so effectively. And in the aftermath of the overturning of Roe v. Wade by the Supreme Court, it seemed as if the Democrats could even conceivably hold both the House and the Senate. In the aftermath of that, the president had a little bit of momentum where his major infrastructure bill, with its focus on climate, passed. And the narrative was out there. The president wasn't as incompetent as we were led to believe, as many in the press had led people to believe. My sixth point, when there was a referendum in Kansas on outlawing abortion, a referendum that was promoted by the right, but that failed dramatically in the aftermath of the Dobbs decision. And at that point, Republicans really regrouped on abortion, and candidates sensed that voters were truly conservative, meaning that they were skeptical of change and dramatic change on abortion. Although many states automatically outlawed abortion, particularly in the South, this movement really kind of slowed down after the Kansas referendum. It is no longer central to Republican campaign efforts, but it remained a key issue for the highly educated who are now the base of the Democratic Party. But I think, like the January 6th issue, it doesn't energize most voters who've seen the impact of inflation, economic slowdown, and crime more directly. That's not to say that abortion isn't a critical issue, and it is among educated women. it is an issue that it brings great emotion to the fore, but it's not an issue that's going to decide most of the congressional seats that are up for grabs. I'd say 2 weeks ago, I would have said the House was going to go Republican. This is my 7th point, with a 25-seat majority. And the Senate was likely to be 50-50 or 51-49 for either party. But with the latest inflation numbers and economic numbers, the tide has cruelly turned. The Senate seats now in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, and even in Georgia, where Herschel Walker has had to deal with multiple women indicating that he paid for abortions for him, are somehow now trending Republicans. And the Democrats are now admitting that even safe House seats, one safe House seat, such as the seat held by Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee Chair Sean Patrick Mahoney in upstate New York, are now up for grabs. So I'd say as of today, we're looking probably at a 40-seat majority for the Republicans in the House, which is a big majority, but it's not it's much less than the majority the Republicans had against in the Obama midterm. And we're seeing significant Democratic Party resources now being spent to save Maloney's seat. We're now seeing President Obama, President Biden, Vice President Harris sent to Pennsylvania to campaign for John Fetterman, who seemed as if he was up now, but I believe now is trailing Dr. Oz in that in what is the most watched Senate race this time around after a poor debate performance by John Fetterman. So as of today, I'd say the Senate's probably going to go 52-48 Republicans, but it could still remain 50-50 or even 51-49 for the Democrats. But I really do think 52-48 is what we're likely to see after the elections. The fascinating thing to me are the governor's races. This is my 8th point. The New York Times today has op-eds, well, actually tomorrow's paper saying both New York State and Oregon, and these are separate op-eds, could elect Republican governors. This would be historic. Both are reactions to crimes, reaction to looting, rioting, and the like, particularly in Oregon. In Arizona, we see Carrie Lake, the hard-edged conservative, decisively leading against Katie Hobbs, who's been a disappointment, the Democratic Attorney General in Arizona. Michigan is another race that turns out to be quite surprising. Gretchen Whitmer, who herself was considered a real candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination if Joe Biden didn't run, is now running neck and neck in a blue state with Tudor Dixon, a pro-Trump talk show host, who herself was for outlawing all abortions, and she's moderated her position since the Dobbs decision. But if Whitmer loses, that's a huge sign of a big Republican wave on next Tuesday. My 9th point, as for an impact policy-wise, I think on the Democratic side, we're going to see a massive increase in executive orders by the Biden administration, significant attempts to prevent new domestic spending and to increase defense spending by incoming Senate and House Defense Committee chairs and committee chairs, all of whom are internationalists. They'll do some battle with some of the more isolationist elements in the Republican Party, will arguably be strengthened, particularly in the House. But I think we're mostly going to see oversight hearings on the Afghanistan debacle, on the southern border, and on the Hunter Biden affair, which has increasingly legal implications, including for the president. 10th point, we'll have a better sense on election night if President Trump has been aided in his potential campaign by wins by the candidates he selected. I think if he emerges, if some of the candidates he chose, a large number of them win, particularly for the Senate, I think he's more likely to run for president. I've been skeptical that he would be running, but I think he's more likely to run if his candidates win. And look, Governor DeSantis has clearly emerged as the lead challenger and has campaigned around the country for candidates, as have other numerous Republicans seeking for the nomination. Lastly, my last point, I think Republicans, in this 11th point, Republicans need to be careful. A House Republican caucus that pivots to a Biden impeachment or overly focuses on obstructionism could aid Biden in his attempt to portray the Republicans as zealots who don't have the nation's best interest at heart. And it'll be very challenging for them if they really take the absolute hardest line against President Biden. They need to focus on pocketbook issues, which likely incoming Speaker Kevin McCarthy has noted. Biden, however, is the weakest communicator in the White House in decades, and it may be hard for him to take advantage of an overly zealous Republican majority. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Weinstein. And I was really surprised to hear your number on the House and the Senate, which could be our discussion point later. But also you touch upon the implication of this election to the future Biden administration, and maybe we also want to talk about the implication on the foreign policy. But now I want to ask Ambassador Sasae to make a comments. Sasae Sensei.
Well, thank you very much, SAHASHI Sensei, and also nice to see my old friend, Ken Weinstein. Let me make some comments on the Ken's presentation a moment ago. On the midterm election itself, I agree with Ken on the point like the situation will be harsh for incumbent traditionally, and also inflation is the most serious concern among the American people. And you might argue, you might say that the administration is not really working well on this point. So this could be more serious topics which would influence the voting attitude of Americans. That is true. But at the same time, you were referring to some failure or debacle of the Biden administration, like the issue of Afghan. But I'm just wondering how this Afghan issue is still making impact on the American public. I know that there are some, the critical opinion among the experts, but I'm not quite sure about the American general public per se. You didn't talk much about crime issues, but I want to hear more on this issue. Is that really helping Republicans or Democrats? Because crime seems to be continue to be high on the American interest. And from a standpoint of Japanese, say that all this crime using guns and so forth is very much a American phenomena. There isn't much gun control, and some people argue Trump make America great again movement is instigating extremist move and racial discrimination and even political violence, as we saw recently on the attack on Madame Pelosi's husband. But and also this impact of January 6th riot, you seem to be playing down the impact on the election, but I see that that continue to go on, not to mention the impeachment failure and so forth, but I think there are some problems still around President Trump. On the abortion issue and also legislative achievement you just mentioned, I agree that this help the Democratic candidate and also helping Biden. And I noticed that there was a bipartisan effort in the Senate to make this legislative achievement possible. But I want to hear more from you. And this bipartisan effort in the Senate would continue, or just one-shot phenomena. I hope that this will continue in the future, because divided America we don't want to see. On the specific, the questions of contested states, and also the counting of the winning candidates, I kind of agree with you on the Senate side. the Republican is getting better in states like Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Nevada, and now Georgia. But I want to hear about your concern from the Republican perspective. Is there any other state, contested state, that you are worried about? What's happening in New Hampshire and some others? So at the end, I still think that the race is very close. I'm not quite sure 52-48, but it could be even tight. But I'm not really digging into day-to-day, situation on each state. So possibly you could enlighten more on the other states, you just mentioned. On the House side, 40-seat majority, that's your predictions. It's pretty big. Is this, you think, that the happening because of influence of Trump or Biden's weakness? Possibly, in your opinion, this could be both. But I agree with you that, say, compared to a month ago, the Republican is swinging upward. Now, there is one question I'd like to ask from you. This is, would there be any confusions like, vote counting and cheating and frauding? We have seen in the presidential election before. I hear that there are lots of, electoral office people are threatened and leaving. Is that widespread phenomena or very compartmentalized, limited phenomena? And I think there are some people who are still worried that if the Republican candidate will be losing, there could be more voice that this was cheating. They cannot accept the result. So what's your view on this point? I would stop here, and I would like to discuss more about the impact on the presidential election and the impact on the diplomacy, as Sahashi Sensei mentioned.
The Weinstein, please.
Sure. Yeah. No. Yeah. Further, no. Great comments. And let me start with the Afghan debacle. To me, what was interesting about the Afghan debacle politically, and it was one of the most awful things to watch the way it unfolded. The terrorist attack at the airport, the scenes of the Afghans trying to get on planes to leave, falling to the ground. What that did, that was really the first instance that Americans saw President Biden in a crisis and the way he reacted. And that was seared on the minds of the American public, both Republicans and Democrats. I mean, Democrats in Congress were, in many cases, almost as critical as of the president as Republicans had been. You had people like, there were numerous cases of Democrats from Jason Crow, Senator Menendez, others just highly critical of the Seth Moulton, highly critical of the way the withdrawal was done. And I think that, and the way the president was unable to explain the policy that he chose and was really gruff with reporters, I think that's what seared it into people's minds. Whereas he had been, as it turns out, though, there were ups and downs going into the Ukraine war. At one point, the president wanted to be a diplomat and was trying to arrange for a diplomatic solution so there wouldn't be a war in Ukraine. He then at one point was kind of like a dove thing, and that would prevent the war. Then he became a hawk and tried to deter the war when it was too late. But certainly the conduct of the administration in terms of gaining broad support for a coalition and restoring NATO has been quite impressive with regard to the Ukraine invasion, the helping Ukraine defend itself against Russia. But it was the Afghan situation where people saw Biden up front and saw something they really didn't expect to see. A president who, when he met with parents of soldiers who were killed, could only talk about his own son who had died of cancer, couldn't bring himself really to put himself in the shoes of those parents, and I think that sort of was incapable of making multiple sentence arguments with the press. He was clearly tired. He was snapping. And so I think that was the impression of a man who kind of was not up to the job physically, didn't have the stamina necessary. And so I think that sort of really had the broad impact. It wasn't so much the argument among specialists, should we withdraw or should we not, though I think it's clear we should not have withdrawn in retrospect. As for inflation, it is the major issue. I mean, there's inflation and the economy together. There's a Harris poll out which says that 1 in 4 Americans, just the new Harris poll, are so stressed about the economy. Inflation is a source of stress today for 83% of Americans. 57% say they don't have enough money to pay their bills. 43% said saving money for things in the future is the major source of their stress in their lives. 85% worry about a potential recession. 82% worry about crime rates, which I'll turn to in a second. So look, the crime rates have been going up for some time now, but the crime that we're seeing, most of the focus in the last few weeks has not been on the kind of crazy shooter crime and the kind of the absolutely abhorrent attack on Speaker Pelosi's husband yesterday or on Sunday in San Francisco. Absolutely horrifying, has no place in our democracy and the like. But you know, when you dig into it, it turned out the man was both an illegal alien in this country illegally, and he also had severe mental illness. And a lot of our crime in our major cities are linked to mental illness. They're not the kind of crimes related to necessarily to the kind of gun violence you see that it happens in schools and shopping malls. That's also absolutely horrifying, but it's oftentimes one-on-one crime that you see in the New York City subway, where we've seen a mayor who came into office saying he was going to reduce subway crime. It's now at an all-time high. People are getting thrown onto the subway tracks regularly, in part because there's mentally ill people who have been deinstitutionalized and are out there committing these violent acts. It's very scary in our major cities. Philadelphia has a very liberal district attorney who is, and a lot of, as does San Francisco, as does Manhattan, and a lot of people who have committed repeat crimes have been released. Philadelphia has had 1,000 murders from January 1st, 2021, which is a record. And so we're seeing Chicago, the level of crime and violence, it's in all these major cities, and people are, and particularly in New York, are now saying, hey, this has got to stop. And there's crime against Asian Americans, there's crime against hate crimes against Asian Americans related to COVID, there's hate crimes against Jewish Americans. And in many of these cases, it's ethnic minorities who are committing these crimes, as you see on video cameras in New York. And I think that's the reaction why Lee Zeldin, the congressman from Long Island, who's now running for governor, is neck and neck with Governor Hochul in New York, and you know, may defeat her. It's another place where the Democrats have had to spend money to defend what should have been a safe seat. The Republicans, the last time the Democrats lost incumbent governor was Mario Cuomo in 1994. It was defeated by George Pataki. So I think, you know, that kind of crime wave is bad. That doesn't excuse the gun crime wave that Ambassador SASAE alluded to, which is also a big problem, no doubt. But it's those voters who are for gun control have been voting Democratic for a long time. Voters who see crime in their areas and are changing their minds are oftentimes swing voters, suburban Democrats, or suburban independents who just have said, we've had enough. The Democrats have gone too far to the left, and we're seeing that in a lot of states now. There's also been a reaction to some of the some of the woke teaching agenda in public schools that got, for example, Glenn Youngkin elected as governor in Virginia as well. So there's, it's a mix of sort of criminals being let out, certainly the crime that's related to illegal immigration, related to drug running, and a sense that elites are out of touch with what's going on in our country. I think that if there is a Republican wave, which I think there is, and it's kind of hard to see what stops this wave right now between now and election day. I mean, the one thing that could stop the wave is having President Trump too visible. I mean, I think the Republicans have been very fortunate in that Trump has not been in the front seat in the last few months driving the Republican agenda, that it's been individual candidates, whether it be Kari Lake, whether it be Dr. Oz, whether it be the distraction over Herschel Walker. And it's kind of astounding that Herschel Walker could be elected to the US Senate, I have to say, given all the questions about his background, about his own admission of multiple personalities and the like. You know, but he's up now by a point or two in many of the polls in Georgia, and polls for some reason oftentimes understate Republican voters for a variety of reasons. So I think we can take those polls seriously. Let me turn to, you know, but it's pretty astounding, but I think it's a reflection of where people feel about crime, about the direct inflation in the direction of the country. They feel that things are kind of out of control and they want to sort of take control back. But I think it's also been the fact that Trump has not been all that visible until now. And what's funny is candidates are not inviting, by and large, Donald Trump in to campaign with them. Trump is inviting himself in. He's inviting himself into Pennsylvania to campaign. He invited himself. So Dr. Oz this coming Saturday has to go to a rally with President Trump on the eve of the election, which he'd rather be out there talking to independent voters than, you know, having President Trump there with him, probably in all likelihood. Similarly, with when you go down the list of other candidates, whether it be in Ohio, J.D. Vance, who now I think is solidly in the lead in Ohio, although he's had some challenging moments against Tim Ryan, who's been an effective opponent. He doesn't want to have President Trump there campaigning for him. I think everyone wants Trump sort of to kind of go away in some sense because they know how divisive he is for the independent voters who make up their minds now and will make up the decisions for where the election goes. So let me leave it at that. You asked about the New Hampshire Senate race. I think that one is likely to go to the Maggie Hassan, the incumbent. The Republican Republican opponent General Bolduc denied that Biden had won the election up until the moment that he won the Republican primary with President Trump's endorsement. And then all of a sudden, the day after the primary, he said he had new information and President Biden was legally elected. And so he too was trying to distance himself from President Trump. And all those things are not good signs for the president if he seeks to run for the nomination next time. It means that a lot of Republicans have real doubts about whether he should be the nominee. There are definitely reasons to be concerned about claims of cheating, claims of the elections being stolen. Absolutely, that's a deep concern. I think that will happen. I think it will happen either way, and it's just absolutely abhorrent in a democracy when people can't accept the results of the election and try to challenge it. Whether it's just absolutely abhorrent. I thought that Al Gore and Joe Lieberman set the record for being a class act in 2000 when they accepted the election after the Bush-Gore debacle of 37 days. And I think that's the way we ought to run our elections. So, and it's the kind of gentlemanliness and respect that we need. And the way that Mike Pence behaved in recognizing the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is the way that we ought to respect our democracy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I think we are now have to go the implication on foreign policy. But before that, let me ask just two small questions to Dr. Weinstein. So first question is about social issue for Republican. As you say, like a Roe and Wade and abortion issue is important, but not the most critical for Democrats, especially highly educated people. But my question is, how about Republican supporters, including Christian right? So how do you read their reaction, and they are really mobilized but after the Roe and Wade, to support their local incumbent, to be re-elected in this midterm? This is my first question. And the second question is, this is a question now shifting more toward foreign policy, actually. So I think Republicans are not so much supportive for Ukraine. I mean, they have some hesitation to the aid to Ukraine, and there is some, say, a negative view on the sanction against Russia because that could be that have triggered the inflation and energy crisis. So, how do you think, such perspective? I mean, Republicans should be more internationalist. I mean, like in the past. When I start to study about the United States, Republican was like that. I mean, they supported the international order, and they really know how important it is to support the small country invaded by Russia like this. So, what is your take on the Republicans' negative or a little bit passive attitude toward Ukraine and Russia sanction?
Two great questions. Look, on Roe v. Wade, I'd say this. I think that most of the Republican base is pleased. Most of the social conservatives of the Republican base are pleased that Roe v. Wade is no longer the law of the land. Those who care more about religious questions still are trying to put a focus on outlawing abortion at the state level. I don't think that those movements have much legs to them because I think most of the voters, social conservative voters, actually care more, are sort of more politically active than they are. Their political views have more weight than their religious views, and they understand we're in a democracy and you have to compromise. And so, though there are those, there will always be lip service to making abortion outlawed. I think we're probably kind of at a stalemate where we will see states outlaw abortion, say, at 16 weeks or so, 15 to 16 weeks, at a point where the fetus can be viable, which was the test in Roe v. Wade, rather than completely outlawing it. And that bans on abortion during rape, for rape and incest, those are extremely unpopular. And the life of the and issues affecting the life of the mother. Most of the social concerns among Republicans have turned to the woke agenda, have turned to attacks on the Biden administration for so prominently featuring transsexual activists. Including the president did an interview last week with a transsexual reporter. Those are the issues I think that Republican social conservatives are more focused on these days than abortion itself. As for Ukraine, you made an interesting distinction between the Republicans you think of as supporting international order and those. And you also talked about that Republicans should stand up for small states like Ukraine that are being attacked. And I think that's exactly where most Republicans stand. They are outraged by Russia's attack on Ukraine. Russia has very little sympathy there are a few people who watch Tucker Carlson on Fox News, and Tucker has a huge nighttime viewership, but it is not an opinion that is deeply held, certainly not in the U.S. Senate, nor in a little bit more broadly held in the U.S. House, that we should not be focused on Ukraine. 11 Republican senators voted against the Ukraine supplemental. One of them was former Ambassador Bill Hagerty. Bill is not an isolationist at all, but I think that he and a number of the Republicans have great concern about what our European allies are doing for Ukraine's defense. And we see both the French and the Germans in particular, who are neither providing the weaponry, the French have started to step up, nor providing the economic assistance that they should be presenting. And it's a question of burden sharing in this case, more than anything else. But you see people like Lindsey Graham, you see most Republicans standing solidly with Ukraine, and you're going to see the committee chairs coming into both the House and the Senate, whether it be Mike McCall, who's going to chair the House Foreign International Affairs Committee, whether it be Jim Risch, whether it be Mike Turner, who's going to be chair of the House Intelligence Committee, whether it be Roger Wicker, who's going to chair the Senate Armed Services Committee if the Senate goes Republicans, I think it will. These are very strong internationalists. They deeply care about Ukraine, and they will be there to make sure that Ukraine gets the equipment it needs. They've oftentimes had to put pressure on the Biden administration at first, which was reluctant to arm the Ukrainians, and they've continued to do so. But that being said, there is a large block there will be a big block of 20 to 30 kind of isolationist Republicans or kind of Trumpy Republicans, and some of them will switch back and forth. Some of them will be more libertarian than others. At the end of the day, it's a funny thing. We had one senator, Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, who voted against the accession of both Finland and Sweden to NATO, but he voted for the accession of Macedonia to NATO, which made absolutely no sense. All the other Republicans voted for the accession of Finland and Sweden to NATO because they're major. They will be major elements of our alliance given their capabilities. And so I think that this point about Republicans being isolationist is overwrought to some degree, but it's definitely a concern in the House.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So Sasae Sensei, do you have any question on Republicans' foreign policy and the implication of this election on Republicans' foreign policy?
Before coming to that point, I want to ask one question to Ken. And this could be affected by the result of this midterm election. But I think Japanese people are interested in who will be the possible candidate for the presidential elections from Republicans. There are many already we see, and MAGA continue to make influence one way or another, even though there are some disillusionment about it. But is Trump running or other candidate like DeSantis and the Governor Youngkin of Virginia? More importantly, Mike Pence, possibly. He's your guy, I understand it. And also a person like Nikki Haley and Pompeo. So there are run-up, but even beyond that, there could be some others. But what's your sense at this moment? I don't know. It's too early, possibly next spring and so forth. But at this moment, what's your sense? What's your take?
Look, my straightforward take was I think Donald Trump wasn't going to run. I think that he wasn't going to run because I think he kind of sensed instinctively that he wasn't getting the kind of support that he needed. And he saw that Governor DeSantis was beating him in some of the polls. And I think I don't think he wants to put himself in a situation where he would possibly be defeated. But I think but if he thinks he can win, he will run. What's funny is I had dinner the other night with a prominent Democratic friend who said and a Biden administration appointee who's worked with Joe Biden for decades who said the only way he says one way to assure that Joe Biden will definitely run for re-election is to nominate Donald Trump. That Biden is eager for a rematch and thinks he can beat Trump for what it's worth. And this is just on his instinct. He hadn't discussed it with President Biden at all. So I think it's still up in the air whether Donald Trump runs. I think you want to keep a mystery as long as possible. It was interesting that he sort of announced that he was going to run and then hasn't yet. Clearly, Governor DeSantis is going to run. He's got the largest war chest ever for a governor. He got a lot of favorable press. Look, like all candidates, he's got some shortcomings. He's not a warm and fuzzy personality. He's a blue-collar guy who is strangely a kind of intellectual who likes to read and likes to think about policy more than likes to schmooze people. Joe Biden is a schmoozer. Donald Trump is actually a schmoozer, likes to talk to people, likes to deal with them, likes to interact with them. George W. Bush and Bill Clinton were masters at this. Clearly, Mike Pence's, the odds are very good that he's going to run. The odds are also excellent that Governor Youngkin's going to run, that Ambassador Haley's going to run, that Secretary Pompeo is going to run. I think Chris Christie is likely to run from Governor. Chris Christie, I think you'll probably have 10 to 12 Republican candidates. And I think if Trump does run, he's going to face a very different field than when he ran last time, because you will have a sense, I think, among the candidates a kind of informal agreement that they will oppose Trump if he's likely to be the nominee, that a bunch of them would drop out more quickly than they did last time. And there's also, I think, a sense that they'll gang up on him in some sense. And Chris Christie, Ron DeSantis, Mike Pompeo, these are people who they don't mince words. They're pugilists. And so I think you're going to see a much tougher race if Donald Trump gets into the race. I should say on the Democratic side, it's really not clear whether President Biden's going to run or not. My gut instinct is he's probably not. And if he doesn't run, I think you have an open field. You have clearly Governor Newsom of California who wants to run. You've got Secretary Raimondo, the Commerce Secretary, who's been a real superstar in the Biden cabinet, particularly with Japan on the economic 2+2. She's done a lot of interesting things. There's some talk she might be named Treasury Secretary, which would be the equivalent of being named Agriculture Minister in the Soviet Union at this time. And it just would be a hard job to have, a job you don't want to have given where inflation is and where jobs and the fact we're likely heading into a recession. But she could be a strong candidate. Obviously, Pete Buttigieg is considered a strong candidate, though there are lots of questions about his performance as transportation secretary with all the challenges we've had with ports and delivery of items and the like. I think and there'd probably be 3 or 4 other surprise strong candidates who would get in the race. You could have 2 wide open fields in both parties with some surprisingly strong candidates. And obviously Vice President Harris will want to run, but I think her performance is such that most of the Democrats I talk to are not optimistic about her ability to wage a full-fledged campaign until the Democratic convention.
Great. So maybe before taking some question from the audience, I think we also want to hear more about your perspective on foreign policy, implication on foreign policy. So just let me raise up just 2 questions, which many Japanese people has a big interest. First one is China. Second one is Taiwan. So first is China. Yes, as your presentation said, I think Republican might be more, inclined to promote increase of defense budget, and I think Republican will be kind of a driving force for U.S. competitive strategy against China. But still, I'm just wondering what will be the difference from now and then GOP dominating House and Senate. What will be the difference? This is my first question. And the second question is really minor, but about Taiwan. Because, the reason I say minor is the rumor said Mr. McKenzie, maybe the next Speaker of the House, might visit Taiwan after this election. Do you really believe this will be true or not?
Boy, those are 2 great questions. Look, I'd say the big difference on China, but I think there's almost unanimity on China policy in the country, and it's a testament to Xi Jinping more than anything else that he is kind of at a time of unprecedented divide in the United States on almost every issue, that this is the one issue we are really united on as a country. And I do think that the Republicans have a sense that our defense spending really does need to be increased, and that given the rise in inflation, even before inflation began, when we had 2.4% inflation or 2% inflation and less than at the outset of the Biden administration, that the defense spending increases of 1% were actually defense spending cuts. And there's a real recognition, and it's been championed by, for example, Congresswoman Luria from Virginia, who is a Democrat, a former naval officer, just talking about our defense industrial base is really weak. We can't produce the ships that we need. And so I think there's kind of a bipartisan sense that we really do need to get much more serious about our defense infrastructure. And hopefully there'll be some focus on shipbuilding, on some of the more concrete things that we haven't focused on. I think that the Republicans will be much more skeptical of attempts to promote cooperation with China with regard to climate change, which has been partly a focus of the Biden administration. They haven't gotten very far on that. There's also some talk now, incidentally, that John Kerry may be stepping down as special envoy on climate issues. And he also potentially could be in the mix of Democratic presidential candidates, theoretically, in 2024, if that's the case. But I think he's frustrated about his inability to get things done. On Taiwan, the McCarthy rumor is certainly going around. Look, I would, my gut instinct would be that I think we ought to focus on arming Taiwan. We ought to focus on training Taiwan. We ought to focus on getting the Taiwanese to spend more for their own defense. I think those things are more important than these visits, which are largely symbolic and create an awful lot of noise. I'm a big believer in, and I've always been my entire life, walk softly and carry a big stick. And I think we ought to do that with regard to our Taiwan policy, that we ought to do for the Taiwanese what we did for the Ukrainians. And we're starting to see some movement in that direction in terms of potential cooperation with the Taiwanese on development and manufacturing of weapons. We need much more of that. This is a really critical moment for Taiwan. So that's what I would say on that point.
Thank you. So maybe let me take some questions from the audience. I think Dr. Weinstein and Ambassador SASAE, you can also open the Q&A section to see the question and answers. But I think first two questions from Ambassador Ishii has been answered already. That is about the midterm election impact on the presidential election. And the second question is about Trump's chance of becoming a GOP candidate and who will win in 2024. So let me go to Mr. Daniel Mandel's questions. And maybe the second one on immigration. I mean, the second half of the first one. On immigration and the crisis at the southern border, what is the Republican solution? And Republicans held control over the government for the last several years, yet the number didn't go down. So border things is still really popular in TV program, of course, here in Washington. So what could be your solution for southern borders?
Yeah, look, I mean, look, part of the issue, I think that the Biden administration has taken a kind of contradictory position on the southern border. Originally, before the election, there was kind of an implicit understanding and articulated by numerous Democrats that the Democrats would be welcoming to individuals crossing the border, and that led in the outset of the administration to a massive spike in people crossing the border at first, and now there's been an attempt to kind of rein in some of this immigration. I suspect what the Republicans will want to do is to push the Biden administration to complete the border wall, to increase the amount of spending on for immigration, for ICE, for the immigration police and the like, and to take an even tougher stance than what the Biden team has done, including expelling people more rapidly from the United States and putting back in place this Remain in Mexico policy where individuals were forced to stay in Mexico until asylum cases were decided. But that goes against what a lot of the Democratic Party base says. So that I think is is the key. It will be the question for Republicans, which will be to focus on what's going on, to figure out ways to increase patrols, to figure out more funding on the border fence, to border wall, to try to finish it. And the part of the problem is a lot of Washington is based on this kind of gotcha politics where somebody does something and then somebody else responds. And rather than having an effective bipartisan solution, you try to corner people into taking absolutely ridiculous stances and voting for things that, poison pill bills and the like. And you need to kind of get over this and try to work together constructively on these problems.
Thank you very much. I also have questions before this panel started. So it is not shared at the Q&A section now, but let me pick up two questions that is relevant to foreign policy. The first one is about climate change or climate crisis. And so if Trump or GOP comes back to power again, especially will Trump still deny climate change and take no action at all, or any other GOP candidates will be more favor taking some actions against the climate crisis? So this is the first question. And the second one is a very famous question, TPP. So, you know, even though we really sure United States, regardless of the party, really committed to international order. But in international order, we really emphasize liberal trade in Japan. So what is your perspective on TPP and trade liberalism in coming 2 years after this midterm election?
Well, yeah, look, on climate change, I think there's beginning to be a change in the Republican Party, particularly among younger voters and among some younger conservatives who recognize that climate issues are a real challenge for our country and that steps need to be taken to mitigate it. Even Ron DeSantis, as governor of Florida, has talked about the challenge that climate poses. And so I think we're starting to see an evolution here. And where the Republicans go, their focus tends to be more on technology and on market-oriented solutions, you know, including promoting next-generation nuclear as the best means to move as quickly as possible to decarbonize, for decarbonization. That's probably the most effective means promoting next generation nuclear technology, which Japan has now gotten into in a very serious way. And it's something the Biden administration has done very effectively. I mentioned Secretary Raimondo before. You know, that being said, I think, but most Republicans don't want to do something over the short to medium term that is going to cause a spike in oil prices, because we've seen the impact that has on our economy and on other economies. So I think that's where the concern will be. President Trump, I can't see him changing his mind on climate, but I can see him focusing on next generation nuclear as something that would give us a geostrategic advantage over China and Russia, for example. The other question you had, I'm sorry, I was TPP. Yeah, exactly. Look, TPP, it's now popular among Democrats and unpopular among Republicans, and that's kind of a reflection. Trump withdrew from TPP, and so whatever Trump disliked, and there's some things whatever Trump disliked, Democrats tend to like, and there's some and there are things Democrats were rightly critical of President Trump in many ways, but TPP is an issue where the parties kind of flipped because of where Trump was on trade. My sense on TPP is it's not likely. President Biden doesn't want to bring it up. Certainly, this administration has not at all been focused on trade agreements that are going to reduce tariff barriers at all, and their focus really has been on secure supply chains and the like. So I'm not holding my breath on TPP having a future in the immediate term. Where I think the more likely way for the United States to take part in TPP would be for the United Kingdom to join TPP, and then for the United Kingdom and Japan to make an extensive effort to convince Americans, conservatives and liberals, that this is critical to our global geostrategy, to defending the liberal world order, to our interests, and eventually possibly to bringing Taiwan into the TPP. And I think that presenting it in that way will make it much more popular, period. So yeah. So if I could say one thing, there's a question up there about Donald Trump and crime. Look, there's no doubt that the kind of language that he's used, the kind of violence he's called for, are beyond the pale in period in American politics, and anything related to January 6th is absolutely beyond the pale. I think Republican candidates have been scared to criticize President Trump because if they criticize him, they risk getting somebody from getting a primary challenge against him. But we'll see a new majority now. We'll see where things go. And depending on where things go, he may be a much less influential force in the party after November 8th. But it's less that people agree with President Trump than they don't want to have become the focus of his attacks in many cases.
Thank you very much. I think we start to be really, the time to close this session. So, but before that, SASAE, Ambassador SASAE, do you have any comments or final comments or remarks?
No, not much, except for expressing my sincere thanks to Dr. Weinstein. It's a great pleasure always to have you, and I hope you will be coming back again to go to Mount Fuji. And I see you again, and thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Ambassador SASAE, and thank you very much a lot to Dr. Weinstein. I'm also living in the States now, but it is very midnight today for us, and you should be very overwhelmed by many questions from the audience and from Ambassador SASAE and myself. But thank you very much for your very thoughtful answers to all questions. We really learned a lot from your perspective. So thank you very much for joining us today. And I think now time is up, and I want to conclude this seminar on US midterm election 2022 by JIIA from conservative perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. An honor to be with you. Take care.